faithfully sharing value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally with the Book Talk. Today, we're diving into the book Is Paris Burning? On August 25th, 1944, Paris was liberated. That day, Adolf Hitler, at his headquarters in East Prussia, Germany, roared and demanded of his subordinates, "Is Paris burning?" Just 2 days earlier, he'd ordered the German troops in Paris to fight to the last man and die with the city. Nazi demolition experts were already there, ready to torch the entire beautiful place, along with its stunning architecture and art treasures, if Paris fell. But we know that didn't happen. Today, we're exploring this book, Is Paris Burning? It's a record that documents how Paris went from the brink of disaster to liberation by the Allies in August 1944, showing us how history shifts through the combined efforts of big shots and ordinary folks. The two authors, Larry Collins and Dominique Lapierre, are journalists from US Newsweek and France's Paris Match magazine. 20 years after Paris was freed, they spent nearly 3 years gathering stuff like military archives from the US, France, and Germany, and interviewed over 800 people, from top brass like de Gaulle and Eisenhower to German soldiers and Perusians, to write this non-fiction work. The translator is the famous Dong Leshan, who's translated classics like 1984. Is Paris Burning? Was his last translation. Dong Lishan called it a masterpiece in journalism history. The book tells the stories of 536 people around Paris's liberation, making sure every fact is backed up, everyone's accounted for, every line has a source, and the plot's totally gripping. Whoa, it's as thrilling as a novel. So, what went down in the city that summer when Paris was freed? What saved Paris at the last minute? Behind the scenes, how did the Allies, German forces, French communists, de Gaulle, and others play their cards? Now, let's rewind to Europe in the summer of 1944, when Hitler was fighting like a cornered animal. By late 1943, 201 had shifted to the counteroffensive phase. By June 1944, U.S. British Allied forces had landed in Normandy, France, and the Soviets were ramping up attacks on the Eastern Front, squeezing the Germans in a two-front war. At that point, Paris was pretty much the only prize Hitler had left after years of bloody battles. If the Allies break through Paris, the next step will be to smash open the gates of Germany. He decided to find an iron-fisted general in the army who could firmly execute orders to become the defender of Paris. The chosen one was Dietrich von Schultitz. Schultitz was short and stocky, born into a Prussian military family, and studied at military schools since childhood. He served in the German army for 13 years with outstanding merits. People described him as someone who never questioned orders and always carried them out resolutely, no matter how harsh. He also had a nickname, the expert in city destruction. In the battles of Rotterdam in the Netherlands and Sevastopol in Russia, after the German withdrawal, von Schultitz executed orders perfectly, turning those cities into scorched earth. On a morning in early August 1944, in a bunker called Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, Hitler appointed von Schultitz as the commander of Greater Paris, fully responsible for defending Paris, suppressing all sabotage, and if it fell, to level the city. This was von Schultitz's first meeting with the Führer. The brief few minutes of the encounter gave him a huge shock. Because on one hand, the task Hitler wanted him to execute was to flatten a city of 3.5 million people, seen as a human treasure, which would make him and his family infamous forever. On the other hand, the German army at this time was suffering continuous defeats, with morale collapsing. He had hoped to see confidence in the Führer, but instead seemed to see only a sick man. Hitler looked haggard, dispirited, showing signs of aging, and spoke breathlessly. Only when speaking passionately, he would spit from the corner of his mouth. And with sweat beads splattering on his face, he yelled, "No one can stop me from leading the Germans to final victory." The author writes that in the days to come, many things would depend on this. That August morning, von Choltitz experienced disillusionment. But disillusionment aside, after meeting Hitler, von Choltitz immediately took a train to Paris and replaced the non-combat German troops stationed there with his own forces. The non-combat German troops originally stationed there, following Hitler's orders, planted several truckloads of high explosives at each location: Luxembourg Palace, Place de la Concorde, telephone exchange, train stations, and over 40 bridges. Each time explosives were planted, he marked a cross on the map. By August 15th, the map of Paris was covered in red crosses. The news alarmed Pierre Taittinger, the mayor of Paris appointed by the Vichy regime. He came to von Choltitz's headquarters at the Hotel Meurice and suggested they go to the balcony. Outside was a peaceful scene. To the left, the gray bridge of the Louvre. To the right, the symmetrically laid out Place de la Concorde. Children were playing in the Tuileries garden in the middle, and in the distance, the golden dome of Les Invalides was shining. Taitinger said, "Imagine one day you might stand on this balcony again as a tourist, admiring these buildings that bring us joy and sorrow. You could say, I could have destroyed all this, but I saved it. As a gift to humanity, my dear general, isn't this something a conqueror could be proud of?" Von Choltitz remained silent. After a moment, he turned around and said gently, "Mr. Taitinger, you're truly an outstanding advocate for Paris. You've done your job excellently. And I, as a German general, must also fulfill my task." Meanwhile, panic was spreading in Paris. Since June 15th, 1940, when German troops occupied Paris, Parisians' freedom has been tightly gripped by the Germans. For example, after midnight, if someone was caught outside, they might have to shine German boots all night or be executed on the spot. After von Choltitz took office, the non-combat German troops withdrawing from Paris looted everything they could take. Truckloads of items like hotel curtains, telephones, even pigs from neighbors' gardens, though some Germans left politely. For instance, a German colonel left a thank you note for the homeowner and included cash to pay for 2 crystal glasses he'd accidentally broken during his stay. Um, but such people were in the minority. On the eve of Paris's liberation, people were nearly in despair due to food shortages. A small newspaper run by an academy even told citizens that in dire situations, they could eat elm and linden tree leaves and other parts. What panicked Parisians more was news from Poland. In August of the same year, as the Soviet Red Army approached, an uprising broke out in Warsaw, Poland's capital. An enraged Hitler ordered the destruction of Warsaw. Over 85% of the city's buildings were burned down, and 200,000 people died. Parisians fear that Warsaw's fate could hit Paris at any moment. They're eagerly hoping the Allies who landed in Normandy would enter and liberate Paris soon. But now, the Supreme Allied Commander, Eisenhower, decided to bypass Paris and push north. He has 2 reasons for this. One is fear that if the Allies enter Paris, they'd get stuck in street fights with the Germans, wasting troops and wrecking the city. The other bigger reason is that the Allies can afford to liberate Paris but not sustain it. After freeing it, keeping Paris running with essentials would be too costly, taking up the strength of 8 combat divisions. For example, just food and medicine alone would burn through 75,000 tons in 2 months. Coal use alone is 1,500 tons a day. All this stuff needs Allied trucks hauling it from Normandy into the city. That guzzle a ton of gas, and right now what the Allies are shortest on in fighting is gasoline. With all this in mind, Eisenhower decided to pincer encircle Paris, bypassing it to strike straight at two German rocket launch sites up north in France. At the earliest, by mid-September, they'd circle back to free Paris. But Paris, unable to wait for the Allies, was now teetering on the edge of an uprising. After the Normandy landings, on August 15th, the ministers from the original rulers, the Vichy regime, fled. France had this tempting power vacuum. Hoping to grab power in the chaos were, on one side, de Gaulle's forces, and on the other, the French Communist Party. First up, Charles. In World War I, de Gaulle served his country and got wounded multiple times. After 281 kicked off, the French leaders only held out for over 40 days before surrendering to the Germans. When Paris fell, de Gaulle escaped and built his own troops overseas. He led a movement called Free France, fighting fascism. Folks saw de Gaulle as the last flicker of hope for the French army. He wasn't just highly respected among the French, he also got backing from the Allies. When Normandy landed, de Gaulle had about 500,000 forces worldwide. Nearly 100,000 of his troops followed the Allies into France, waiting to pounce. In German-occupied France, he also set up a tight underground network and guerrilla units. Now, let's look at the French Communist Party. In 1941, when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, the French Communist Party started organizing anti-German resistance. After nearly 3 years, their armed fighters had hit 250,000. Back then, France's regular army was under 500,000. They had secret Union printing presses, and their guerrillas planted spies in all key spots across Paris. They were the most disciplined and often the bravest force in France at the time. The French Communist Party decided to launch an uprising in Paris on August 19th, 1944, to seize control of the city before de Gaulle could. Even though this might provoke a fierce German counterattack, the communist leader in Paris, Rohl, said this: "Paris is worth the death of 200,000 people." Of course, he hoped most of the dead would be Germans. De Gaulle would never allow the communists to take Paris first. After failing to stop the uprising, the Gaullist underground in Paris decided to act before the communists to gain the political initiative. Now, at 7 a.m. on the 19th, de Gaulle's men beat the communists by an hour to occupy the police headquarters in central Paris. Suddenly, thousands of silent people flooded the streets, armed with pistols, rifles, grenades, or even barehanded, hoisting the French flag on the police headquarters roof. Taking control here meant commanding Paris's vital police force. The French Communist Party had also planned to make seizing the police headquarters a symbol of the uprising. The Gaullists won the first round. When Rohl, riding his bicycle past the police headquarters, saw this, he flew into a rage and immediately changed into his military uniform by the roadside. He ordered his men to start the uprising at once. Insurgents first infiltrated the telephone exchange, destroyed German eavesdropping equipment, then attacked public buildings like district offices, police stations, and post offices with any weapons they could find. Louis Berty was among the first to join the uprising. He was a butcher by trade, living in Nanterre, west of Paris, near the dreaded German prison Mont Valérien, where Berty heard gunshots daily of Germans executing French people from his shop. Since 1941, a total of 4,500 people had been executed there. On the day of the uprising, Berty got word from his resistance group. He took out his hidden pistol and slipped on an armband that read, "Liberty or Death." Then he left home to fight the Germans. At the police headquarters, a shy middle-aged man led a group of insurgents in hastily making explosives. This man was Frederic. Joliot-Curie was the 1935 Nobel Prize winner in chemistry and Madame Curie's son-in-law. Frederick brought sulfuric acid and potassium chlorate from his mother-in-law's lab where radium was discovered, mixing them with gasoline in wine bottles. This recipe, called the Molotov cocktail, quickly spread everywhere, blowing up many German trucks and even tanks, with many Perusians spontaneously joining the resistance. They built barricades in the streets using stumps, sandbags, furniture, pianos, even urinals. Some homes became first aid stations, others printed leaflets. Some citizens spontaneously captured German soldiers. This was the uprising's first phase. The French caught the Germans completely off guard. Soon, the town halls of all 20 Paris districts were taken over by the insurgents. Two German soldiers who were leisurely sipping brandy in a restaurant one second became Butcher Bertie's captives the next. Bertie's captives were marched to the liberated Neuilly town hall. On the way, Bertie quite gracefully shooed away Parisians spitting at them. He said, "They're prisoners." But the Germans soon reacted and the situation changed abruptly. German tanks began rolling out from every corner, launching counterattacks against uprising strongholds like the police headquarters. 3 tanks surrounded the Neuilly town hall. After 3 hours of bombardment, the insurgents ran out of ammo and supplies. In the town hall, the dead and dying lay side by side on office desks. Hours earlier, when they cheerfully occupied the place, no one thought to bring first aid supplies, anesthetics, or even bandages. Many wounded bled to death. This battle ultimately left over 40 dead and injured. 2 men escaped through a foul-smelling sewer. The Germans captured the last 20 trapped inside, including Butcher Bertie, taking them to their command post, where a soldier stepped out to identify his former captor. This German soldier was Bertie's former captive. Bertie trembled uncontrollably, unable to raise his hands. But the soldier walked up, wiped his cheek as if removing spit, then pretended not to know Bertie and moved to the next person. Bertie was lucky. Innocent deaths and injuries were happening everywhere. After the uprising began, at least 100 French died daily, with 400 to 500 wounded. Some German tanks even tied French civilians to their turrets as human shields to prevent Molotov cocktail attacks. Though the German counterattack advanced swiftly, Paris fortress commander von Schultitz grew increasingly troubled. From the start of the uprising, he was underreporting and downplaying the situation in Paris. As a soldier, he should have firmly counterattacked. Moreover, before he took office, Hitler enacted the collective punishment law. German generals, if they don't carry out orders, not only are they themselves in danger, but their families back in Germany will also be implicated. But von Choltitz knew that from a global perspective, the defeat of the German army was inevitable, and holding on to Paris would only delay the defeat by a few days. And if he mobilized all his forces to suppress the uprising, the destruction of Paris would be unavoidable. Paris's historical landmarks, like the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower, are within the combat zone. The police headquarters, fiercely contested during the civil unrest, is only a mere 280 meters from Notre Dame. Von Choltitz couldn't bear the historical blame for destroying Paris. Therefore, on the second day of the uprising, August 20th, he accepted the mediation of Swedish Consul General Nordling and reached a ceasefire agreement with the Gaullist insurgents. But in the eyes of Communist Roll, this was tantamount to treason. Through newspapers, he called on people to keep fighting, to go to the barricades, like during the French Revolution and the Paris Commune uprising. Thus, just hours after the ceasefire agreement was reached, Paris was engulfed in warfare again. On the night of August 21st, von Schultitz endured the most agonizing night of his life. The situation in Paris could no longer be concealed. He repeatedly received orders from the German High Command urging him to crush the uprising at all costs, even by leveling neighborhoods, and to activate the citywide bombs. The air support sent by Hitler was already in position. The responsible Air Force major assured von Choltitz that they could flatten the northeastern corner of Paris overnight, killing all 800,000 residents there, not even sparing a cat or dog. But von Choltitz didn't know how much longer he could stall. He sat shirtless, sweating profusely in the unlit room, pondering countermeasures. At first, he resolved that if Hitler forced him to be the scapegoat for destroying the city, he would sit on the last bridge in Paris and blow himself up along with it. As dawn approached, he thought of another plan. Since he was already guilty of disloyalty for secretly signing the ceasefire, he might as well go all out. He summoned Swedish Consul General Nordling, again asking him to tell the Allies that Hitler planned to bomb the city and that German forces outside were closing in on Paris. Once reinforcements arrived, he would have no choice but to seal off the city and wage full-scale street warfare, destroying it. Before this, he was willing to open Paris's roads to the Allies, but only for up to 48 hours. If they couldn't get here in time and Paris was destroyed, they'd be the ones to blame. At this point, not only von Choltitz, but de Gaulle and the French Communist Party were also seeking Allied support. Rohl sent someone named Gallois to ask the Allies for weapons, but on the way, Gallois changed his mind and decided to ask for troops instead. He believed that only by the Allies entering Paris early could more deaths be avoided. He crossed German lines and arrived at an American military camp. This disheveled, unshaven Frenchman sincerely told Allied General Edwin Sibert, "The people of Paris want to liberate their capital themselves and present it to the Allies, but they can't end the uprising they started. You gotta help us, or there'll be a terrible massacre with hundreds of thousands of French killed." Sibert relayed this to Eisenhower. On the other hand, since the uprising began, de Gaulle had been pressing Eisenhower to liberate Paris immediately. But Eisenhower didn't want de Gaulle's political motives messing with Allied military plans. Rejected, de Gaulle threatened that if his pleas were ignored again, he'd pull the French 2nd Armored Division out of the Allies and head straight to Paris. Eisenhower knew de Gaulle was a man who wouldn't quit until he got his way, and that's exactly how it played out. The French 2nd Armored Division was stationed in Normandy at the time. On August 21st, the third day after the uprising began, without Allied permission, a small force had already sneaked toward Paris. On August 22nd, the fourth day after the Paris uprising broke out, Eisenhower ordered the French 2nd Armored Division to march from Normandy to Paris. Soon after this force set off, Allied headquarters got word from Nordling. Fearing von Choltitz might change his mind and worried about accidents for the French division, they immediately sent the U.S. 4th Division to advance to Paris via a different route. 20 years later, Eisenhower admitted to the book's author that liberating Paris was at least 15 days ahead of schedule, and it really hurt Allied pushes on other fronts. But history can't play what-ifs. The gains and losses from this decision are a bill that'll never get settled. Upon receiving the advance order, General Leclerc of the French 2nd Armored Division immediately shouted to his subordinates, "Move on Paris now!" He waited 4 years to utter those words. He originally lived in a small village near Paris. 4 years ago at dawn, Leclerc, born de Hautecloque, rode a red bicycle away from his wife and 6 children to London, joining de Gaulle's ranks. Later, his wife heard of General Leclerc's heroic exploits without realizing it was her husband. She told their children, "I don't know who this Leclerc is, but he's remarkable. Your father would have done the same." Leclerc's force had 4,000 vehicles and 16,000 soldiers, Arabs speaking little French, Lebanon loyalists, many never seen Paris but honored to liberate it, though mostly Frenchmen like Leclerc who'd left families for the goal. For these Parisians, this advance wasn't just liberating a city, it was coming home. But this homecoming road proved treacherous. Rain bogged down tank treads in mud, while Germans ambushed them with hundreds of artillery pieces along the route. Private Deschamps and his column were ordered into Paris via the southern route. In an outlying town, soldiers discovered intact phone lines to the city and swarmed into homes. In cafes and shops they called Paris families. They shant, away 4 years, shouted joyfully, "Mother, get the champagne ready!" We're coming home, but he never tasted that champagne. Just outside Paris, where the Eiffel Tower became visible, a shell exploded. Deschamps' tank, he died curled inside his steel coffin. Another column met fierce resistance along Route Nationale 20 near Paris. This nearby town was the hometown of Private Paul Landrieu. 3 years earlier, he told his wife, "I'm going out for cigarettes, back in 10 minutes. He vanished without a trace. Now, he decided to surprise her by bringing home that pack. He drove his tank past childhood soccer sidewalks, his wedding church, and the tobacco shop he'd lied about visiting. But before long, Paul Andrieu's tank was hit by German artillery fire. He died at his doorstep, his chest torn open by shrapnel. His charred uniform pocket held an unopened pack of Camel cigarettes. This force left heartbreaking stories like this all along their path. In comparison, the U.S. 4th Division faced much lighter artillery resistance. Using just a Paris tourist map, they entered Paris first. August 25, 1944, became a day etched in Paris's history. The city finally welcomed liberation. The first Parisians to spot American soldiers spread the word. Their 1,532 days of darkness had finally ended. Power plants, once rationing electricity, now exceptionally supplied every home. Radio stations played La Marseillaise on loop. Every household cranked radios to full volume, opened windows. The majestic melody seemed to sweep the whole city into a tidal wave of sound. Then, within minutes, every church bell rang out. Paris's entire sky vibrated with solemn chimes and thunderous harmonies. Parisians leaned on windowsills, weeping uncontrollably at the bell's resonance. Right after the French 2nd Armored Division breached German defenses, bursting into Paris almost simultaneously, the crowd erupted. Girls and children clung like bunches of grapes to every tank, armored vehicle, and military truck. Parisians brought out long hoarded treasures to show gratitude, like champagne hidden in cupboards, black fabric scraps, hand-sewn clothes, tricolor flags made from bed sheets, flowers, tomatoes, carrots, even a rabbit. An American soldier called it the happiest scene ever on Earth. 15 miles of ecstatic people waiting to shake hands, kiss cheeks, and shower you with food and drink. Another GI remembered a woman shouting, "Souvenir," as he passed. She suddenly turned, yanked a pipe from a stranger's mouth, and gave it to the soldier. The man flashed a resigned smile. For some French 2nd Armored Division troops, this was reunion time with family and friends. A woman dashed through gunfire and threw herself at an advancing infantryman. She'd finally found her son. At Place du Châtelet, a corporal suddenly spotted two familiar faces before his tank. They were riding a tandem bicycle. His parents and a major. When he met his parents in Versailles, he barely recognized them. His mother had lost significant weight. His mother had lost 50 pounds, his father 32. 20,000 German troops still lurked throughout Paris, hunkered in strongholds ready to ambush the enemy. For the Allies entering the city, one street corner brought cheering crowds, the next, a hail of bullets. Meanwhile, at a German command post, 1,500 kilometers away, Hitler flew into hysterics upon learning the Allies had entered Paris. He screamed hoarsely at his chief of staff, Jodl, "Is Paris burning?" Is Paris burning? But von Choltitz no longer wanted German soldiers dying needlessly. She returned to his office, deciding to offer only symbolic resistance. Outside his office, a gray-haired veteran hid behind sandbags, preparing for a final stand. As von Choltitz passed, he overheard the old soldier mutter, "Back in Münster, my farm, my wife. They've waited 5 years for me." Münster, a city in western Germany. The old soldier never made it back to his farm. He died from an enemy grenade when the Allies attacked. After the Allies stormed the headquarters, von Choltitz ordered surrender. He and his officers placed holsters on desks, hands on heads, like medieval knights casting swords onto conquerors' shields. As Allied troops escorted von Choltitz, Perosian's fury nearly killed him. Women, faces contorted with hate, clawed his uniform, tore his epaulet, spat in his face. Men cursed him as a son of a bitch. Passing Rue Jeanne d'Arc, one woman nearly lunged to tear him apart. Then, a French girl stepped in front of him. She whispered, "Madam, you are like Joan of Arc." Ultimately, von Choltitz was held in a POW camp for 2 years and 8 months. After Germany's surrender, the gunfire echoing through Paris for 7 days finally faded. In this battle, German casualties totaled 3,200, Allied deaths 42, French civilian deaths 127. And at this historic juncture, de Gaulle finally succeeded in taking control of the city. On August 20th, the second day of the Paris uprising, de Gaulle, who was originally in Algiers, ignored Allied objections and hastily found a small plane that didn't meet flight conditions to fly back to France. The plane had no instruments, no radio, was overloaded, and ran low on fuel, yet it landed on a rubble-strewn French coast with just 120 seconds to spare before the tanks went dry. On Paris Liberation Day, de Gaulle first went to police headquarters for a power-taking ceremony. Then, at a Communist Party rally, he outmaneuvered them with an off-script speech that won huge support while ignoring their resistance efforts. Then, seizing the momentum, de Gaulle arranged a parade from the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier to the cathedral on August 26, the first day after liberation. Throughout the event, sniper fire forced people to duck for cover, but he marched on proudly, completing every ritual. His courageous and steadfast figure won over all the people. An American journalist there said, "From now on, de Gaulle has France in the palm of his hand." But de Gaulle didn't know history almost played him too, nearly costing him his life in Paris. During the speech, German Major Leuthold hid in a building corner by the square. Hearing the roaring cheers, he glanced out and saw a French general in a black convertible. Leuthold figured killing a French general wouldn't be a bad way to end his war. So he grabbed his machine gun and aimed at the general's head. But he reconsidered. If he shot, the mob would hunt him down and kill him. Reluctantly, he lowered the gun. He felt no general was worth risking his own life. Only 2 years later, in a POW camp, Leuthold saw a newspaper photo on a bulletin board and realized he'd almost shot de Gaulle. For ordinary Parisians, they too entrusted their fate to chance and luck. Maurice Bouvier was a corporal in the French Toine Armored Division. En route to Paris, he got a passerby to call his mom. "Your son's coming home." On Liberation Day, Maurice's mom, dad, and sister cycled all morning through Paris, searching among regiments with black berets, but couldn't find him. When he was feeling downhearted, someone reminded him that in the backyard of the restaurant, there was still a soldier in a black beret sleeping soundly, curled up like a ball. In the sunlight, the family of three bent down, squinting to look at this snoring, filthy man. Then Maurice's mother reached out and gently stroked the man to wake him, just like when he was a sleeping child. This was his son Maurice, and the sister was filled with tears. Looking at this big man, when they last parted, the brother was still a young boy, just growing taller. He saw the cartridge clips on his brother's belt, glinting metallically, and thought it was his harmonica. The girl shyly asked, "Do you still play the harmonica?" On the day of Paris's liberation, we don't know how many Parisians like Maurice's family were reunited, or how many wept for loved ones forever lost in the war. But Hitler's revenge quickly pulled them back to reality. That very night of the parade, German forces bombed Paris. Within 20 minutes, it caused over 1,000 casualties and destroyed nearly 600 buildings. Sitting in the Defense Ministry office, de Gaulle told his subordinates that the toughest days were still ahead and their work had only just begun. Is Paris burning? That's the end of the book's content for you. This book is hailed as one of the greatest documentary works in history. It's like a sweeping lens across history, focusing on the less than a month period that decided Paris's fate, with nearly 300,000 words, both grand and vivid. The authors used a string of pearls and a thread to organize the book's structure. The thread is the game of four forces: Germans wanting to destroy Paris, de Gaulle and French communists vying for control, and allies avoiding it. This balance of power among the four sides runs through the entire book, creating a gripping reading rhythm. The string of pearls refers to the stories of hundreds of ordinary people. For example, the butcher Bertie we mentioned earlier and the private Landrieu who wanted to bring cigarettes home, their stories are just as important as von Scholtitz, de Gaulle, and Eisenhower's. The authors strung them along that thread of four-sided struggle, adding flesh and blood to the book. As a documentary literary work, the two authors didn't presuppose a stance, but restored this history and these characters through massive details. When describing Paris on the eve of liberation, the authors wrote that housewives used crumpled newspaper balls soaked in water as cooking fuel for longer burn time. Ads claimed 6 newspaper pages could boil a kilogram of water in 12 minutes. Just a few strokes vividly depicted the supply shortages. When the uprising erupted, the authors depicted a German sergeant ambushed, waving a grenade while charging into headquarters, screaming, "What are you waiting for? Send tanks! They've roasted my men like sausages." Few lines captured German shock perfectly. For their subjects, the authors neither judge morality nor force praise or criticism. They simply record objectively. For instance, they depict German firing squads suppressing uprisings brutally, yet also the Münster veteran longing for home and the German soldier who deliberately spared Bertie. These seemingly contradictory details reveal real people wrestling with humanity amid historical events, precisely the value great documentary works offer. Well, is Paris burning? That concludes our reading of this book. Notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.